Today's October 1st, which means two things. Number one, creepy stories set in the Warhammer 40K universe to get ready for Halloween. And number two, it's Orktober. So for this entire month, we're going to be dedicating ourselves to creating creepypastas, scary stories, and orc lore videos, terrain videos, painting tutorials, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to be celebrating the awesome green skin culture that is the orcs, and then we're also going to be celebrating the creepy stories or the mysterious and scary side of Warhammer 40K, which is pretty easy. Today is the very first scary story of the entire year. This is a creepypasta that I created for you guys to just listen to while you paint or do whatever it is that you guys do, and I hope you guys enjoy. If you guys are new to the channel, we post Warhammer 40K lore videos every single day, so I need you to do me a huge favor. Hit the thumbs up button if you like this type of content. Share with your friends, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, whatever social media you guys use, or wherever your community of Warhammer 40K players congregates. Share it with them. Hopefully they'll like it, and then comment down in the comment section below. Let me know what you think of the story, and then also if you have any cool ideas or something you guys would like me to explore within the Warhammer 40K universe that's creepy or scary, just comment down in the comment section below. So I really hope you guys are going to enjoy the content that we have for this October or Orktober, and let's get into the first creepypasta, The Ghost on the Imperial Ship. Today's story takes place sometime in the late 41st millennium, aboard the lunar-class cruiser, the Lord Caron, an ancient and baleful vessel constructed on a long-forgotten forge world by millions of God Emperor-fearing slaves whose lives were spent for its completion. It is said that the remains of these builders are imbued into the very foundation of the massive ship. Their bones are entombed within its structure, and their skulls are ornately sculpted into its dark facade. Lord Caron served as a key vessel on many bastion fleets in the Segmentum Tempestus, existing in a near-perpetual state of warfare against the frequent chaos and Xeno raiders that assailed the sector, up until its decommission and subsequent purchase by a mysterious rogue trader in the current millennium. But this story isn't focusing on the peculiar origin of this derelict vessel. The tale is about an indentured boy named Michael, whose life would never be the same after his first voyage on the Lord Caron. Michael's parents were loyal agri-worker farmers who signed an imperial covenant with a noble family by which they agreed to hand over their child in servitude in exchange for his schooling, transportation, and a potential job within the Adeptus Administratum once they arrived on the high world of Sheol. A contract like this was not unheard of. It was an honored way of moving up the class system and securing a career within the immense bureaucracy of the Imperium. If Michael was lucky, he would become an Administratum envoy and return to his parents an accomplished bureaucrat. If not, at least he would have the opportunity to etch out a living within a noble family on a major hive world. This was truly the best opportunity the parents could afford to give Michael, and he knew and appreciated all of it. Even better for Michael, the family he was serving had a son the same age, Corey. Corey and Michael immediately took a liking to one another. The two shared similar interests in space travel and were enthusiastic about the adventure that lay before them. Corey taught Michael everything he knew about the vessels of the Imperium, from the history of the construction of the fleets of the Great Crusade on the Red Planet's Ring of Iron, to the importance of Geller fields, which shield the vessel from the evil creatures that prey on human ships. The parents encouraged this type of sharing. However, Corey's father would often have to correct the young boy's wild imagination. It was a bit comical how most of his son's stories would somehow deviate into horror thrillers where the evil enemies of the Emperor were always defeated by the mythical sky warriors known as Space Marines. In truth, Corey's father understood that the reality of life was sadly oppressive and soul-crushing. There were no demigods and evil creatures. The true enemies of the Imperium were the power-hungry administrators, drowning out the glory of the God Emperor with endless bureaucratic nonsense. And so with a heavy heart, the family left the comforts of their agri-world on a voyage towards a truly scary place, but one that was inevitable. Because of the family's noble position, they secured a very comfortable place within the Lord Caron. The journey would last a total of 19 solar months, and they would enjoy it in their own private living quarters. It included a library, a kitchen, and 2 cabins. Although this was small for the family, Michael was thrilled not to be obligated to share the living space with other groups like he did on his agri-world. It was unbelievable to Michael how massive this ship was. Nearly 500,000 souls inhabited the Lord Caron, and yet the corridors of the ship seemed eerily quiet. Not that Michael left the family's living quarters all that much anyways. Mornings for Michael were filled with chores like cleaning, cooking, prayer preparation, and anything else the family needed. Now, because the space was fairly small, the sounds of everyone's footsteps was an easy way to tell where they were throughout the day. When Father would return, the boys would study in the library. The sounds of buzzing servo skulls scrying through data slates and the drops of their candle wax hitting the library floor became a welcome sound that Michael learned to enjoy. Unfortunately, this calm routine didn't last. 2 months into the voyage, Corey's father became terribly ill. Within 3 days, this strange ailment took his life. Needless to say, it was extremely hard for the family to cope with this loss. Everyone, including Michael, were devastated. Back home, it was customary to say your last goodbyes during a funeral procession, and it was believed that a proper burial was required to ensure that the deceased passed into the Emperor's army of the light. Even on a ship, the body was expected to be honorably displayed and then disposed of in the proper naval traditions. But the ship officials explained that because the vessel entered warp space, there was absolutely no way that the traditional send-off could be performed. Instead, the body would be held in the medical bay until the ship exited warp travel. The simple knowledge that Corey's father was laying alone somewhere on the ship absolutely crushed everyone, and soon the reality of the situation sunk in that without him, the entire purpose of the voyage was going to fall apart. The passage to their new home was secure, but their prospects and even their security on the Hive world was a mystery. Sadly, Corey's mother spent most of her days in thoughtless trances. It was as if she hit a mental wall and couldn't get over her husband's death. Corey himself seemed stoic, but in reality Michael could tell he was sadly in denial. For the next couple of weeks, the ship officials visited the family, but the boys began to feel uncomfortable with the intruders as it became clear that payment for the voyage wasn't cleared all the way, and the real reason they were there was to take note of the valuables that the family possessed. Like vultures, they were more than likely planning on taking what was owed and then picking off anything extra. The boys simply tried their best to carry on in such a helpless situation. 9 weeks after the father's death, something strange happened. It was during the ship's nighttime that a loud humming sound traveled throughout the entire vessel. It was like a wave of noise that passed through the family's entire living quarters, shaking furniture and driving servo skulls into a jittering spasm. Michael stood up from his bed as his eyes tried to adjust to the darkness that had fallen in the room. Both the boys shared a cabin, but Michael was the only one that made an effort to find out what the noise was. As his eyes began to perceive the space around him with a tiny bit of light shining from the closed door, everything around him from his bedsheet to the walls of the cabin seemed to squirm in place, almost as if they were made up of thousands of little particles. The feeling it gave Michael was gut-churning, as if he was washed over with the most unsettling sensations. But just as he began to panic, the sound returned and the room somehow came back to normal. Michael looked over to Corey, who was laying with his eyes wide open, but neither of the two said a word. Michael simply took a sip of water from his glass at his bedside and laid back to bed. After about 12 minutes, Corey was snoring, but Michael was still trying to brush off that unsettling feeling that washed over him. As hard as he tried, Michael couldn't get back to sleep. He simply laid in bed staring up at the cabin ceiling. Minutes turned to hours, and soon Michael began to realize he would only get a couple of hours of sleep. It was just before the tiredness was sinking in and Michael was kind of half asleep that he heard the main door of the living quarters unlock. The scraping sound of the huge metal door dragging across the floor was unmistakable. Michael reasoned that it was probably a ship official coming to explain what the strange noise was and possibly checking to make sure that everyone was alright. However, the next noise he heard was a pan falling in the kitchen. Michael laid quietly in bed, listening to what the intruder would do next, when he came to the scary realization that there was no sounds of footsteps, and that's when he heard a servo skull buzzing into the library and shuffling through different books. The ship was so quiet Michael could hear the dripping of the candle wax hitting the floor. That's when the sound slowly began to trail towards the boys' cabin until it was right outside their door, and then the door handle began to twist. As the door opened, Michael froze in a state of complete panic. It was almost as if Michael's brain cut off all power to his physical body, and the boy strained to even move his eyes towards the direction of the door. In this state of sleep paralysis, Michael could clearly make out a strange-looking man hovering slightly above the floor. He had a hooded cloak concealing his face. For the first couple of minutes, Michael couldn't accept that this was happening. It had to be a dream of some sort. But after hovering at the entrance of his cabin for what seemed like an eternity, the man flowed into the bedroom. He came to rest right next to poor Michael. Praying to the God Emperor that this thing wouldn't look over and reveal its face at him, Michael decided to close his eyes. At that moment, even the movement of his eyelids felt like it would trigger the creature's reaction, but nothing happened. The boy sat there, motionless, anticipating the ghoul to violently snatch him up from his bed, but again, nothing happened. The next thing Michael heard was the sound of footsteps in the kitchen and the movements of pots and pans. He opened his eyes and realized it was the following day. Corey was still asleep, and Michael could freely move his body, although it was incredibly tense. The door to their cabin was shut, and there was no creature. What he was hearing was Corey's mother making breakfast. Michael got up, entered the kitchen, and sat at the small table simply staring at Corey's mother go about her business. At that moment, he was unable to construct the proper way of explaining what had happened to him last night. Part of him was willing to brush it off as just a waking dream, but noticing the boy's confusion, Corey's mom spoke up. The words that came out of her mouth sent chills down Michael's spine as she asked, "Did you also hear him last night?" Michael was petrified. There was no way he could escape the terrifying reality that the family was visited by someone last night. Corey's mother explained that she also heard the door open, the pans fall in the kitchen, and even the sound of her husband in the library. Michael stared at Corey's mother in disbelief. There was no way her husband was the horrifying cloaked figure that appeared in their room. That's when Corey came into the kitchen and Michael was able to recount what had happened to him the night before. What was even more terrifying was that Corey's mother corroborated everything. She heard what he heard, but she was thrilled by the idea that this was her husband. When Michael was done reliving his nightmare, Corey's mother raised her arms, praising the God Emperor for blessing them with the return of her husband. Not really knowing how to handle this information, Corey went into the library and began to read his books. Michael also had no choice but to return to his chores. As for Corey's mother, she spent most of the day praying in her cabin, relentlessly chanting and praying to the God Emperor. Later, after everyone had eaten dinner and the ship day was coming to an end, there came a loud knock at the front door. Corey's mother told the boys not to answer the door. The boys really didn't know why they couldn't open it. Michael was curious to hear what the ship officials had to say about the strange noise last night. But when the second knock came, Corey's mother insisted no one should open the front door. The two boys were then startled by what sounded like scraping coming from the other side of the door. Looking at their mother for instructions, she simply calmly told the boys that it was time for bed. Whatever was on the other side eventually went away, and the family made it to bed. But again, Michael could not fall asleep. This time, he had a good reason after all he had been through. He also made sure not to let Corey fall asleep, checking every couple of minutes and even kicking Corey as he was dozing off. The hours dragged on as Michael's imagination sent him down a spiral of fear, recounting the stories of the evil creatures that hunt human ships as they travel through the void. And eventually the boy scared himself to a near sleep, when suddenly the front door scraped across the ship's metal floor and Michael was again frozen in terror as the same pan from the night before came crashing down. This time, Michael came to the realization that whoever opened the door had left it wide open. The boy desperately tried to wake up Corey before the creature appeared inside the room, but the paralysis was too strong. He couldn't move. The dripping of the candle wax and the movement of the data slate echoed through Michael's mind until once again the creature twisted the door handle and slowly opened the cabin door. Knowing that Michael's mind would never be the same if he set eyes on the creature's face, he sealed his eyes shut and prayed to fall asleep. And Michael's heart was filled with absolute joy as the next thing he heard was the footsteps of Corey's mother working away in the kitchen. Opening his eyes and getting up off the bed, Michael looked over at Corey, who was still asleep, and gave out a loud sigh of relief. He had survived another night of pure terror. He walked into the kitchen and stared at Corey's mother. He simply remarked, "It happened again." Corey's mother looked over at the boy and smiled. "Did you hear him last night too?" Michael didn't know what to say. She was acting exactly the same as she did the previous morning, but this time she explained how she heard her husband open the door, go into the kitchen, and sit at the library. When Corey came into the room, he also acted like it was new information. That's when the almost suffocating reality sunk in. Michael was reliving the same day, which meant that he was going to suffer from the same dreadful visitation of this unknown demon tonight, the night after that, and every single night until he finally looked into the creature's demonic face. And that's the story of the ghost on the Imperial ship. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. This is Gershwin with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.